What's up, y'all? Back at it once again. This is Akoski of Fun Day. And I want to take a look at some Tariq Nasheed. He brought up this thing about called Mink Slink or Mink Link or something like that. It was about a black community in Columbia, Tennessee. And I'm like, yeah, I read that before, but I didn't read too much about the black community. I read more about the riot that happened. And this I want to get into about the riot that happened one night in the community. So this is what I got from this hearing this dude speak on it. Race riot in Columbia, Tennessee, February 25th through the 27th, 1946. In 1946, Columbia, Tennessee was like many other small southern country towns. The town seat of Marion County, Columbia, included 3,000 blacks in its population of 8,000. Most of the inhabitants in this south central Tennessee county farmed for a living. But during World War II, phosphate mining and the chemical industry had expanded and begun agriculture as a source of income. Maury County had a history of racial violence. In 1925 and 1927, white Maury Countyans had lynched blacks for alleged rapes of white women. The most recent lynching had occurred in December 1933 when whites in Glendale area hanged a black teenager and arrested with the charge of rape. In 1944 and 1945, in Mount Pleasant, blacks and white chemical workers clashed over wages and working conditions. After World War II, Columbia blacks veterans returned to an atmosphere of racism and violence. During the Second World War, blacks all over America had developed a new militancy and a vigor resolve to challenge Jim Crow directly. This new determination was expressed in several ways. Black had established new civil rights organizations such as the Congress of Racial Equality, or CORE, and older black groups such as the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, NAACP, grew rapidly. The increasing number of the black votes in northern cities were preparing a base for the future black pressure on national political parties. Blacks also expressed their newfound militancy in the participation of A. Philip Randolph March on Washington movement, which pressured President Franklin D. Roosevelt to issue Executive Order 8802, establishing Fair Employment Practices Commission. Although blacks hoped for increased activism in national life would mean changes in civil rights practices, there was a wide disparity between the actuality and the heightened expectations. Discrimination continued in hiring even as the war ended the Depression. Blacks performed capably in the armed services, but their integration into white units came only when manpower shortages and needed for efficiency prompted. Tensions between black and white soldiers often erupted into full-scale rioting. White resistance to the pressure of this new black militancy caused conflict to spill over into civilian life. In 1943 alone, there were 242 racial incidents in 47 cities. Although the incidents declined in the next 2 years, racial animosity had not been abated by the end of World War II. After the war, blacks faced the same restrictions and predators they had faced at the beginning of the 20th century. Blacks were determined to change those conditions and resist violence against themselves. The fight to change the racial structure would not be easy. It will often be a struggle fraught with violence and bloodshed. One of the opening clashes in this conflict occurred in Columbia late February 1946. On Monday morning, February 25th, Mrs. Gladys Stevenson and her son James, a World War II veteran, walked into the appliance section of Castaneda and department stores in the squares to pick up radio left for repairs. The store had sold Mrs. Stevens' radio to another customer. When Mrs. Stevens demanded compensation for the oversight, William Fleming, an employee of the store, either struck or cursed Mrs. Stevenson, and a fight broke out between Fleming and James, Mrs. Stevenson's son. In the altercation, Fleming was injured when he fell or he pushed through a plated glass window. The police officers arrested Stephen and her son and charged them with breach of peace. The Stevensons pled guilty and received a fine of $50. This solution did not satisfy John Fleming, William Fleming's father. He swore out a warrant for Stephenson's arrest on the charges of assault with the intent to commit murder. The Stephensons were arrested again, but were released when a prominent black businessman, Julian Blair, posted bond for them. Throughout the day, crowds of whites milled about the square discussing the fight and articulating rumors of the lynching that night. Rumors spread to the black business called Mink Slide by whites. Mink Slide was located a block south of the square. Its borders was East 8th, East 9th, Main, in Woodland streets. Afraid of a white mob action, a number of Colombian blacks armed themselves and set out lookout posts on the roofs and the businesses of the Mink Slide area. Many of those armed men were World War II veterans. To make their participants more defensible, blacks ordered lights to be shot out in the businesses of East 8th Street, and then shot them all out the street lights. The chief of police and his patrolman heard the shooting and drove to the corner of East 8th Street and entered a darkened area on foot. Blacks ordered the officers to halt, but the chief and his three patrolmen failed to heed the order and was fired upon. All four was wounded, one seriously. At the county jail, Sheriff J.J. Underwood heard the shots and shortly after learned what had occurred. Early that evening, he had scattered gangs of whites to reassure the blacks in Mink Slide who feared for their lives. Since 4 policemen was wounded, constituting half of the Columbia police force, the sheriff feared that he could not control any future disturbances. He had previously requested help from Tennessee Governor Jim Nance McCord. Now the sheriff hurriedly renewed his efforts to get the governor to send more aides from Tennessee Highway Patrol. Between 10 p.m. and midnight, highway patrolmen, supervised by Tennessee Safety Commissioner Lynn Borman, arrived in Columbia and the surrounding Mink Slide area. This force raided upon one home on the East 8th Street, but the other action was to arrest those who tried to escape from the area. Governor McLeod ordered the Tennessee State Guard, the 2nd Brigade, under the command of Brigadier General Jacob McGavincock Dickerson, to issue the highway patrol into Columbia. Before the guard can assemble, a white mob, accompanied by several highway patrolmen, took over the Monostat Chemical Factory Company bus from the square and drove to the headquarters of the 10th Machine Gun and Chemical Company, the base of the State Guard in Columbia. There, the highway patrolmen demanded arms and munition, claims they had been instructed by the Safety Commissioner Beaumont to deputize and arm the crowd. When the guardsmen would not arm the group, patrolmen threatened to call Governor McCrowell and have him forced to surrender the guns. Commissioner Barman confirmed the claim of the patrolmen, but the guardsmen still refused to turn the arms and the crowd disbanded. When Brigadier General Dickerson did reach Columbia, he met with the sheriff and Beaumont. The three agreed until insufficient guard troops arrived, there would be no attempt to dislodge the blacks in Mink Slide. Dickerson informed the group there would be sufficient support by 7 a.m., and the three men decided that the highway patrol, aided by the guard, should ask the blacks to leave the area peacefully at that time. Should blacks refuse or resist, force will be used as necessary. At approximately 6 a.m., however, the Texas Highway Patrol marched into Mink Slide alone and began clearing area by force. Hearing the shooting, Dickerson immediately ordered the guard to Mink Slide, where it prevented a mob of armed whites from entering the district. By 9 a.m., patrol operation was over. Not one business on East 8th Street was unharmed. Windows were broken by gunfire, interiors were destroyed, merchandise scattered all over the floor of the business. After the patrol raid was over, state and local law officials met in Murray County Courthouse. Governor McCord gave the order to search every black house residential area for any types of firearms. A force of the deputization of the guardsmen conducted the search in pairs, seizing over 300 weapons. After the search, Columbia was quiet, but a new curfew was imposed upon the town. Under the watchful eye of the guard, Columbia remained peaceful until February 28th, where county officials at Murray County began to question black prisoners to learn who was responsible for the shooting of the Columbia policemen. According to interrogation, James Johnson, William Gordon, Napoleon Stewart, they gave the names of Orange Black and Mink Slide on the night of February 25th and implicated prominent black businessmen as their leader. Before anyone else could be interviewed, highway patrolmen came to the jail to identify who shot them during the patrol raid of Mink Slide. Patrolmen picked as their son the same 3 men Murray County authorities had just questioned and brought these men from the jail to the sheriff's office. 2 of these were accused of seizing guns and fired at the patrolmen. The patrolmen returned the fire, killing 2 other black men and injuring the 3rd. Since there is no additional disturbance, the state guard withdrew from Columbia on March 3rd. If compared with the general pattern of race riots in the first half of the 20th century, the Columbia episode was not a riot. In earlier riots, police authorities were either indifferent to the white mob attacks on blacks or aided in those attacks. In Columbia, local law officers acted responsibly as they attempted to calm gangs of blacks and whites. Although 4 policemen exercised poor judgment by in the darkened Mink Slide area, their purpose was to reassure armed blacks gathered there. County officials demonstrated further responsibility by calling a highway patrolman and a state guardsman to forestall future disturbances. Ironically, in the very presence of those groups that wished to clash, which reached the end of the violence. The governor of Tennessee sent the patrol guard and the guard to Columbia, but he gave no orders to unify the command of the two. Before the guard arrived, the patrol had joined the white mob and had made an attempt to arm that mob. The patrol quickly broke the agreements of the unified action. The patrol stormed through Mink Slide route on the man that left there. Whether they gave blacks a chance to surrender peacefully is unknown. It is reasonably certain, however, that the patrol had needed to destroy property. The state guard, who was the sole power standing between Columbia blacks and the white mob and the patrol. Without the guard present there, there had been an even more disastrous conclusion. The patrol quickly overreached because there was only two minor incidents between black and whites. If the guard and the patrol had cooperated to calm and disperse the white mobs, if they had protected and reassured the blacks who feared for their lives, there had been no Columbia riot. The entire episode underscored one glaring inefficiency. Tennessee had no plan for stopping civil disturbances. There was no provision for a unified command of stated force. If such contingency plans had existed, the assault on Mink Slide might have never happened. Yet, even when it occurred, it would have been disciplined procedures to deal with it. The Columbia story gained wide publicity in the newspapers and the magazines. Throughout the days and the months that followed, local and regional newspapers covered the pursuit of the three themes. First, the press attempted to access the blame for the riot. Both the Columbia Herald and the Nashville Banner faultlessly nameless outside agitators were inciting the riot. As civil rights organizations such as the NAACP began investigation into the riot, the newspaper group of outside agitators grew to include communists. The outside agitators in the conclusion were certain Columbia blacks, i.e. forces with calculated conspiracy, joined to disturb the peaceful Southern race relations. Ironically, the second press theme was the support for the local and state law enforcement agencies. According to the media, the riot had not proven that in post-war years, a strong state guard and highway patrol had corroborated the crime and dispersed white mobs, and if they protected and reassured blacks who feared for their lives played. A third theme, especially in the Daily Herald, was to provide summaries of stories printed outside of magazines and newspapers. First, the Daily Herald praised the news coverage, but almost immediately it began to rail at the news services for their blatant misrepresentation of the facts. Many of those national newspapers and magazines have gotten their information by sending reporters to the scene. In their information, many expressed concerns over the future of black veterans and the treatment they might receive. If the Columbia incident was to become a pattern of the post-war racial confrontation, not only were black veterans were in danger, but also black communities as a whole was threatened. Previously, law officers winked at the white citizens who harassed or lynched black victims, but in Columbia was a new departure because the law had become active participant. Newspapers and magazines played a major role in bringing the Columbia episode to national attention, but civil rights organization was chiefly responsible for the development of that. The NAACP provided legal counsel for those arrested on charges growing out of the riot. The NAACP established a National Committee for Justice in Columbia with Dr. Channing Tobias and Eleanor Roosevelt as the court chairman. The NAACP also raised funds for the Columbia victims through the NAACP committee. While the NAACP was primarily involved in legal defense work, others such as the Southern Regional Council and the Southern Conference for Human Welfare investigated the Columbia riot and articulated their findings. In their publication of these organizations claimed that law enforcement officials have violated the rights of Columbia blacks in 5 ways: destruction of property, mistreatment at the time of arrest, no immediate counsel, unwarranted arrests and indictments, and unlawful search and seizure with the guns. In part, it was these and other charges that spurred the United States Attorney General, Thomas S. Clark, to ask the federal grand jury to inquire into the Columbia riot. Earlier, Clark had dedicated the Federal Bureau of Investigation, the FBI, and the U.S. Attorney Horace Ferguson, a Columbia native, to investigate the Justice Department action. Through the FBI report, it was Clark who was seeking Ferguson discovered that no violation of civil rights. However, under pressure from the civil rights group, Clark and the federal grand jury investigation was headed by Judge Elmer Davis of Nashville. Under Davis' direction, the grand jury sought to identify those who destroyed property in Mink Slide. In the investigation, these charges of civil rights organizations and blacks that their civil rights have been violated. Davis told the jury that they either oppose the falsehoods civil rights groups spread about the riot, or they must indict those responsible if the application was true. Davis made it virtually impossible for the jury to find anyone responsible for violation of rights. He instructed the jury that they must find willful intent to violate rights before he could return an indictment. As a result, the jury responded with a feeble report with these findings, and there was no irregularities in the arrest of any Columbia's blacks. The whites who threatened blacks were only mere unarmed teenagers, and the death of 2 blacks in the Marion County Jail was justifiable homicide. In short, there have been no violations of civil rights for the property damage. Blacks done most of it before their arrest, but to identify those who were remaining damages are unknown. Further, the jury charged civil rights organizations had increased racial tensions with their stories, and if there had been an appropriate federal statute, the jury would indict the groups for lack of responsibility for the publicity. It was obvious from this report that Columbia blacks could not expect federal help. Instead, they must risk their fate to Moray County courts and the skill of their defense attorneys. To represent the Columbia blacks arrested in connection with the riot, NAACP employed Maurice Weaver, a white Chattanooga lawyer, and Z. Alexander Luby, a West Indian-born black attorney associated with the NAACP National Legal Committee. These men would work under the supervision of Thurgood Marshall. Weaver and Luby attempted to secure the release of imprisoned blacks who had been charged with offenses ranging from drunkenness to attempted murder. Some prisoners were freed on bail quickly. Others were gained and released only through hearings on habeas corpus petition brought by Weaver and Luby. The Marion County Circuit Court returned indictments against 31 blacks and 4 whites at the end of its regular session. Circuit Court Judge Joe Ingram scheduled an adjournment of the term of the court to hear these cases. The beginning of the case of the 25 defendants charged with attempted murder of 4 Columbia policemen. Since it was necessary to seat a new jury for the trial, 25 black NAACP lawyers filed abatement pleas on their clients, attempting to get an indictment squashed on the grounds of racial discrimination in jury selection. No black had been called for jury duty. When the courts convened, defense attorney presented 23 witnesses to establish bias of jury selection. The prosecution countered with the testimony that many whites had not been called for jury duty. Judge Joe Ingram accepted the prosecution's argument and ruled that there had been no racial discrimination in jury selection. He denied the abatement pleas, but he did agree to hear arguments on the defense motion for a change of venue. Citing racial discrimination and the public opinion that the conviction was assured, the defense requested removal of the trial to Lawrenceburg, Tennessee. Defense lawyers were confident that Judge Ingram would deny a change of venue to Lawrenceburg because the city was too near to Columbia. In that event, the defense would ask for removal of the trial to Nashville or to Franklin, Tennessee, sites they preferred. Catching the defense by surprise, Ingram granted a change of venue and set hearings for jury selection to begin in Lawrenceburg on August 3, 1946. The defense desperately tried to withdraw its change of venue motion. Instead, the case will not be sent to Lawrenceburg County because of open racial prejudice there. Ingram ruled against the defense arguments. If Ingram's decision had upset the defense attorney, it caused consternation in Lawrenceburg. The town's mayor charged that to ask Lawrenceburg to wash dirty clothes of the Columbia was unthinkable. The Lawrenceburg Democratic Union questioned Ingram's decision. The citizen group circulated protest petitions. The Lawrenceburg mayor and 11 other citizens met at the district attorney office, Attorney General Paul Bumpus, hoping to pervade. Bumpus requested the trial to be moved. Attempts to prevent removal of the trial to Lawrenceburg and preliminary hearings for the trial of Columbia defense began in the city of August 3rd. Judge Ingram denied a second motion for a change of venue. He also denied a defense motion for a continuance because of the illness of Thurgood Marshall. So Thurgood Marshall's not there, all right? Because he's sick. Jury selection began August 10th. To avoid the charge of racial discrimination in selection, 12 blacks were called for jury duty. The selection process took an unusual twist when Judge Ingram decided that all the questions on racial matters must be submitted in advance and they must be asked by the bench. Despite a careful question by the defense, the complete jury contained one unusual member, a Tennessee State Guardsman who had been in Columbia during the riot. The prosecution called his first witness September 19. Several points of contention appeared quickly. Could the Columbia police be identified as they was walking in the dirt? Mink Slide District. And did they clearly announce themselves as police officers? Did the defendants have guns? Were they in the area at the time of the shooting? Were they to be determined defense at all the costs? The prosecution can place only 8 of the 10 defendants in the area and had great difficulty playing guns in the hands of 25 of the 25. The defense countered that the prosecution case by producing witnesses who testified that many of the defendants had not been present in Mink Slide at the time of the shooting. Other witnesses told of physical abuse and intimidation by the Columbia police and the highway patrolmen, who used brutality in exacting incriminating statements from defendants while they was in prison. In the summation, the defense demonstrated that many Columbia blacks still remember past lynchings. Because of that frightening memory, blacks acted in self-defense that February night in Mink Slide. The jury received the case on October 4th, and 2 hours later returned a shocking verdict. Shocking to say the least that the prosecution and the Maury County residents for whom the conviction was a foreordained result. The jury found only 2 of the 25 defendants guilty. The defense immediately announced its intention to file a motion for a new trial for those convicted. Perhaps the verdict should not be so startling. The very presence of the trial, Lawrenceburg was extremely unpopular. Not only the threat of adverse publicity, because of Lawrenceburg Countyans felt that Columbia should settle their own dispute. District Attorney Paul Bumpus, in his own admission, was as popular in Lawrenceburg as a polecat in a perfume factory. At the very least, the jury found the testimony unconvincing, and they convinced those men against whom evidence was so most damning. Despite the encouraging verdict, the first 25 defendants' several serious cases remain untried. Since the prosecution believed the conviction of the 2 defendants in the Lawrenceburg case will be overturned in higher court, those 2 defendants were found not guilty without a new trial. Despite the case of the Stevensons never came to trial, nor did the case of the 4 whites charged with attempted murder, and several of the blacks charged with carrying weapons for the purposes of going armed. Lloyd Kennedy and William Pillow, however, did stand trial for the shooting of the Tennessee Highway Patrolman during the February 6th raid into Mink Slide. Pillow was found innocent. Kennedy was found guilty of attempted murder in the first degree. Kennedy appealed his case to the Tennessee Supreme Court, where the sentence was upheld. Kennedy was the only person ever prosecuted on charges originating from the Columbia Riot. Although only 1 man was convicted of the crime committed during the Columbia Riot, Columbians probably believed they were victorious in saving the Southern racial structure by the assault on the Columbia's black community. That community contained all the elements to bring a new push for civil rights after World War II. Politically active blacks, leaders, and veterans newly returned from the war possessed a determination to defend the black community against attack. Ironically, white violence against blacks in Columbia achieved a success for the civil rights nationwide. As a major incident of violence, Columbia meant months of national publicity about Southern racial tensions, and as well as the spotlight on the issue of violence itself. Along with other atrocities such as lynchings in Monroe County, Georgia, July 25, 1946, the Columbia Riot pointed out the importance of the federal government's lack of legal authority to prevent or punish violence against black citizens. The Columbia episode mobilized many civil rights groups, especially the NAACP, to use the increasing political power to force Harry Truman into a stronger pro-civil rights stance. Due to the pressure of black organizations, the growing political power in the northern cities, and the upcoming 1948 presidential election, and violence against black citizens, Truman created the Presidential Committee on Civil Rights. On October 29, 1947, the committee issues a report to secure these rights. It was a broad range account stating the civil rights with a recommendation for augmenting federal authority to protect them. At the very least, the report, the violent events of 1946 and 1947, and black political pressure, forced Truman into commitment to civil rights, even if that commitment was only in rhetoric. The Columbia incident was a reaction to the major events of the late 1940s, which helped create the base from which black organizations strengthened their strength of civil rights push in 1950 and 1960. The civil rights had become a national issue. And there you have it. That's just, about Mink Slide, the black community that stood up and, went gun-ho with the police and all that stuff like that, and the National Guard to protect the business district. As you see, when they came down and they stripped them down, though, finally, with the police and the National Guard came through, they started shooting at the business district. I hope y'all paid attention to that in the story. How they were shooting it up. That was bogus. You know what I'm saying? And you wonder what happened after all that stuff. So it basically kind of broke the community down after all that. But this is what we do here. You know what I'm saying? Much love to the ancestors, But this is what we do here on my channel. We go for Black history that's, unknown, and bring that stuff up, resurrecting it back. Bringing that, that fire back into my peoples. That's what we do. More to come on this. More and more Black history coming down. Subscribe to the channel, y'all. Peace.